You are listening to Fantha Tracks.
Because of the following special program, Wonder Woman and the Incredible Hulk will not be presented this evening.
It's time to get all your Star Wars news in a single file. This is Making Tracks. Here are your hosts, Mark Newbold and Mark Mulcaster.
That's not true. That's impossible.
Greetings and salutations, this is episode 92 of Making Tracks, brought to you by the fine folk over at fanfortracks.com. My name's Mark. I'm very happy because the Premier League football season has finally finished, so it means I get some peace and quiet in my house because the kids won't be crying every time Spurs lose. But Mr. Mark Newbold is with me again this week. I don't know if he's happy or not about the Premier League finishing or not, so let's head over and find out how he is. Mark, how are you?
I'm very well, and I no longer need to worry about the Premier League anymore because my team got relegated, so
Oh dear.
it's not a concern for me. I don't care. I'm all about the Championship now.
Was it West Brom?
West Brom.
Anyhow, This isn't like Making Tracks for Football podcast. This is Making Tracks a Star Wars podcast. So let's talk about Star Wars. How has your week in Star Wars been? Have you had any new, fine, fun things to show and tell?
I've not had an awful lot this week. The main thing that came, I went and picked it up, was I needed new bags and boards for my comics. So I scooted it into Birmingham yesterday, picked up 400 bags and boards. Couple of other little knickknacks. Nothing crazy has come through this week. It's been a reasonably quiet week. How about you?
So I feel a little bit guilty because I live in Stevenage, for those who don't know. Don't come and rob me. But I actually got through from limited edition comics, which is in Stevenage, via the post. So I couldn't even be bothered to go down to the actual store. I got one of the War of Bounty Hunters Boba Fett variant covers. One of just many that I'm trying very hard to avoid chasing them.
Yeah. Which one? The black armour, the crimson one? Which one?
The one which is kind of a forced perspective, so you're kind of like almost looking up on him with a blue sky.
Right.
And he's got his blast up. I don't even know the artist. It's really bad. I just kind of saw it online. I thought I should at least be kind of supporting my local comic store because they do have their own variants. I should get that one at least, if nothing else.
Nice.
Also, I picked up some vintage collection figures. So I think it's wave 31 or 32. I can't even remember. So one with Boba Fett. Can't even see because I'm not even opening up the box very well. Zutton's in it. The Child's in it, and Grief Karga. So it's. I'm pretty sure we may have even talked about it on an earlier episode of Making Tracks when Hasbro released it. So they're here, they're in their little packing box, waiting to find space in the shelves as always. But hey, Star Wars is a busy thing. It's busy for collecting. It's busy for news. So let's discuss some of the news that's come out this week.
Hey man, it's me, Kevin Smith, Star Wars fan, Fantha Tracks fan.
The biggest news, I would say, and weirdly, it's not new news, it's just newly announced. It's actually, apparently, last year's news. Dave Filoni has been promoted to Executive Creative Director at Lucasfilm, which puts him basically in the same job role as John Knoll and Doug Chang, who's been in the news this week because of the fantastic interview on StarWars.com with Doug. Of course, this gets announced, it turns up on Lucasfilm.com. We picked it up. Other sites picked up on it. Everyone's talking about it. Variety, kind of late to the game, picked up on it and got a bit sniffy about fan sites going nuts over old news. They never posted it. They never seemed to know. So really interesting that he's been given this promotion. As a title, I would imagine it's to keep him interested. What do you think? He's got to be headhunted by other companies at this point, hasn't he, Filoni?
I would think so. I mean, I think, Dave Filoni he's a grafter, basically. He's really worked his way up. And obviously, I think we, as fans, do put him on a special pedestal because of his relationship with George and the work they did on the Clone Wars. But I think, to be honest, his work speaks for itself, really. So he kind of does deserve it. And I think, like you said, being of the same level as John Knoll and Doug Chang really creates a kind of a powerhouse of creatives who are all there and basically were kind of like taught, so to speak, by George, either directly or indirectly, with John Knoll and Doug Chan with their work on the prequels and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's a good point, because I think a lot of people sort of look at Filoni as being, and he isn't, but look at him as if he is the last link to George, when of course, as you say, you've got John Knoll, who's been there since before the prequels, Chang the same, came to prominence, with Force Awakens, with Phantom Menace going forward. So there is an old school element of old Lucasfilm creatives that are there, and now you've got 3 of the primary ones with that same job role. So it was good to see. It's good to see that, you know, it's keeping it fresh. It's giving him new responsibilities. Obviously, his focus now, even though he's involved in Bad Batch, clearly his focus is more live action. And of course, that variety piece, which in one way was a little bit sniffy about fan sites, but in another way was quite revealing, also mentioned quite obliquely, just almost in passing, that Rangers of the New Republic is no longer in active development. So I think some sites have made out that because, as a lot of people say, Gina Carano was fired, inverted commas, I'm doing the air quotes, she wasn't fired, they just didn't pick up a contract, that show is now not happening. No longer being in active development doesn't mean it's cancelled, does it? It just means they're not working on it at the moment.
Exactly. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's cancelled. But also, I think when we talked about the plethora of shows that were announced back in November now, I think we kind of discussed that actually the chance of every single one of those shows actually coming to the TV screens is pretty low, because lots of things happen, and I think at the end of the day, Lucasfilm has got to be proactive, and at the same time they're also slightly reactive. So if something's really not working in the series and they've got something similar in another series, maybe it's like it's a rethink. And yeah, I mean, obviously I think immediately everybody kind of says it's because of Gina Carano, but you kind of think, well, maybe what they could do is just basically take a step back and recoup, and just maybe kind of think, well, can we still tell this story, but through somebody else? Is there another way of basically having the Rangers, but not necessarily focusing on Cara Dune, but maybe focusing on somebody else, either similar or completely different? So maybe it's just a regroup, and it will still happen at some point. Who knows? Yeah,
it's not the first time. I mean, obviously, Obi-Wan Kenobi was going to be a film, and then Solo: A Star Wars Story didn't do the business they hoped, and so the Star Wars story movies kind of got parked, and now Disney Plus is the primary focus, so Obi-Wan gets rejigged, and the whole Gina thing happens, like you just said, and you know, they probably can take a step back and focus. But I suppose you look at Lucasfilm. We just talked about old school Lucasfilm. It's all Lucasfilm, but you know, the older guys that were involved, like Nolan, Chang, and now Filoni. You had a scenario before when they were far more, by necessity, judicious in what they chose to put their efforts and focuses towards, because Lucasfilm was a small independent company, comparatively small, and now it's part of Disney, where you're in a world with streaming services. When how many Marvel projects are on the go at the moment? 12, 13, probably more. With plus animation, they just launched MODOK this week when we had, you know, episode 4 of The Bad Batch, and MODOK lands on.
Have you seen that?
I watched it. It was brilliant. It was nuts.
Oh, it was amazing.
Robot Chicken, wasn't it? Basically, it was brilliant.
Yeah, it was pretty good.
You know, and so you've got that much content going on with Marvel, and now Star Wars. You've got the scope. So I suppose if there's a project, just like you said, you know, they announced, what was it, 10, 11, I think, with the Taika thing, projects.
Yeah.
And maybe all don't come to fruition. Is that really the end of the world? Because now you're in a world where Disney can go, okay, let's park this Rangers thing. We'll come back to it if we get the chance. But hey, why don't we do this Yoda thing? Or hey, what about that Ahsoka thing? Or whatever. Or like you just said, perfect, reactive and proactive. So all of a sudden, they suddenly realise that X character is the most popular character in Star Wars at the moment. They go, why don't we do a show about this character? You know, so they've got that much more scope. They don't necessarily need to fix it. They can just move on to something else.
Exactly. They can totally do that. But also, I suppose there's a thing of, you know, you announce stuff, but then you're not necessarily working on it straight away. I mean, like you just said, Marvel, they chuck out this slate, but then obviously that's not necessarily meaning that every single show is being, you know, worked on and is in production or pre-production or what have you. It's going to come down the pipe at some point, and it might just be that they push it back and they let was it Droid Tales and Visions and The Acolyte and Ahsoka come out first, and maybe look at that, or maybe it's something that they actually then review after Rogue Squadron gets released in 2023 and see and go, well, actually maybe there's a different way we could tie it into that, and it could even be called something different. But actually, as we know with Star Wars, a good idea is never thrown out. It gets reused, it gets changed and altered to kind of fit into a different medium or a different kind of storytelling mode. So therefore there's potential for something to come about, but obviously we don't know what it was really about at all, if anything. No. So it's all speculation at this point.
Oh yeah, totally. And it's the sort of fodder that we tend to chew over on the show, isn't it? But you just mentioned Droid Tales, and one of the coolest pieces of news this week, which instantly, as soon as I read it, I thought about you, was that Droids, the original Droids, the cartoon series, the one season and the big heap, I guess, it's coming to Disney Plus. They initially said in the UK on June the 18th. I've since kind of seen inference that it's generally just coming to Disney Plus everywhere on June the 18th. You must have been proper made up about that.
Oh yeah, massively, because as I said before, yeah, droids and Ewoks, that's my gateway drug into Star Wars, really. And I think everybody was a little bit kind of gutted that when they released the Ewoks cartoons, well, only April, really, wasn't it? It wasn't too long ago. But of course, everybody was like, well, hang on a sec, where's Droids? When are we going to get Droids? Which, of course, that's Star Wars fans for you. We're never satisfied until we've got everything. So, but yeah, I mean, it's going to be fun. So it means that we can start doing our Droids roundtables at some point as well.
All up for that. We've never quite had the opportunity to do it. So even if we do it as part of Making Tracks or we do it as a separate thing, I don't mind. Whatever we do, yeah, we totally need to do that. I'm very curious to see. I've not had a chance to watch any of the Ewok stuff yet, which I really should. I watched Caravan of Courage and I watched the the Faithful Wookiee clip from a holiday special.
Sure.
I'm very curious to see how crisp and clean Droids looks, because when they first announced it and you saw some images in Bantha Tracks, and then you'd start to see some of the books came out. Those lovely square-bound books, and they look really crisp and tidy, and you'd see little things. Obviously, the card backs look great. I'm just really curious to see what it's going to look like on screen.
I mean, the Ewoks one looks pretty good. I mean, ultimately, whoever, I'm guessing it's Lucasfilm, kept that archived. They must have kept a decent master of it. I don't know what format they would have archived it to. It might have even been to film. The transfers are really good. It was kids' cartoons, so probably it wasn't necessarily the highest of production qualities, really. And actually, when I watched it, some of the Ewoks, you kind of see that. But that's part of the charm, really, isn't it? And to be fair, I think overall, Disney, with all their archive programs, have done a really good job with making sure that they look as good as they possibly can. So I'm sure Droids will be exactly the same.
It now becomes part of that Disney heritage, doesn't it? Really, it wasn't made to be that, but it's now part of the heritage, like any Fox project or anything else. It's all part of that Disney pool of content, so it's nice that it's been treated well. Really hope Droids is the same.
Fantatrax. Hoodoo!
Really interesting from our buddies over at Boba Fett Fan Club. They found images online of some of the crew stickers that some of the crew on Book of Boba Fett would have. Now, they're not confirming anything. They believe it's genuine. It's not been confirmed, so they might not be. But we're going to assume for the time being that they are. I don't know if you've had a chance to look at them, Mark, but they do show a Legacy Effects Creature Crew patch, a Book of Boba Fett Camera Department patch, and an AD Department patch. And they look fantastic. One with the logo, one with Boba's sort of periscope off his helmet. With the logo and
RF scanner.
And another one that's the Legacy Effects one, which is sort of all black and white and red and very cowboy look. And it basically confirms the code name of the project is Buccaneer. What do you make of that?
Well, funnily enough, I spent the morning dressed up as a pirate, so it's quite apt. But yeah, that one in particular, it's got a very kind of spaghetti western art vibe to it. You've got Fett with what looks like two kind of blasters taking down two kind of silhouettes of bad guys, so that looks really cool. The AD department, that's just basically the logo, which is a little bit, they could be, put a little bit more effort into it, really, because the camera department one looks great. So it's interesting. I mean, I guess Star Wars, it's a swashbuckler kind of space opera kind of thing, so it kind of fits in with that, I guess.
It does, and we'll stay abreast of it, we'll stay on top of it. If any more news comes in, obviously we'll wang it up on the site and talk about it here on Making Tracks. But good news. Good to see this Book of Boba Fett news starting to sort of dribble out. It's not that far away now, is it really? We're 6 months out, so we should start to see more, I think, over the coming weeks and months.
I'm Anthony Daniels, and you are listening to Fantha Tracks. Well done.
Season 1 of The Bad Batch is 4 episodes in, and that 4th episode landed on Friday, as all Bad Batch episodes do, apart from the first one, of course. It was called Cornered, and I think it's fair to say, Mark, this episode, which I found thrilling and really enjoyed it, had a very Attack of the Clones vibe about it.
Oh, yeah, totally. The whole thing just felt like a big homage to Attack of the Clones. And why the hell not, really, as far as I'm concerned? It was a little bit shorter than I think people were expecting, at like 23 minutes. But then the great thing about the platform is that it doesn't have to conform to any specific time length. So actually, they don't need to start to stretch it out and kind of take a plot line, which in itself is actually quite a basic one, and kind of like stretch it out to like a full half hour or something like that. So I thought it was a really good, vibrant episode, real colourful. I mean, I watched it in HDR like I watched all the others, and for the whole street scenes, just the colour was just intense. It was beautiful, which is just exactly what we want from Star Wars. And of course, we get a nice introduction, I suppose you'd say, to a Mandalorian favourite character.
Yeah, I mean, the whole episode was, like you say, vibrant, busy, loads of stuff going on, loads of action. And yeah, it gave Fennec Shand just the perfect opportunity to show what she was about, 30 years before we see her in The Mandalorian? Yeah. I mean, we are way back in the timeline here. So it was just fantastic to see her make her debut. And I watched it with Ruth. We watch it every Friday morning, get up, breakfast, watch Bad Batch. It's a good little routine we've got going. Yeah. And, enjoying the action, tremendously enjoying Omega. I just think she's such a great character, well drawn as a character, beautifully animated, wonderful voice work, just so authentic. I think Michelle Angie's doing a brilliant job with that. But just everything about it, and then we got to the sequence where Fennec, she's a cobra. You're waiting for her to strike, and when she starts shooting at the police, when she takes out that guy on the swoop, just certain moments like, woof, this ain't messing around, is it? There was some quite full-on moments.
Yeah, what I really liked was when she did fire out, I think, were they police, weren't they, on the swoop bikes?
Yeah.
The blaster bolt did that kind of thing back you kind of saw in the original trilogy where you kind of get a bit of fire around the where the squibs went off. And I thought that was a really nice touch. And obviously we saw a walrus man, I guess it's not Ponda Baba, but a walrus man was kind of flying that kind of that cargo loader that Omega kind of hopped onto. But I mean, you're right. I mean, Omega, I really enjoy her because she's believable in her naivety.
Yeah.
If you there's absolutely no reason why she would possibly think about any of the trouble or the dangers about wandering down the street trying to kind of grab a toy off of the back of a truck. You can get away with that with her because we know that she's had such a kind of like sheltered upbringing. And so therefore she doesn't kind of come across as being like a know-it-all.
Yeah.
And genuinely, when she doesn't know something, you kind of believe that actually, why would she know about dirt and stuff like that? It doesn't really, you just kind of accept it. So, I generally thought it was a good episode. I mean, I would like to know from you, what's your take? Who do you think like Fennec is working for? Because obviously she's got a mandate by somebody to try and pick up Omega. And I even think possibly the whole Bad Batch. Who do you think that is?
At the moment, and it's probably going to change, I think it's probably the Kaminoans who've hired her because Dooku was happy to deal with Jango Fett and there was that whole relationship to get his DNA. At the end of the third episode, you realise that they're running low on DNA and they say, basically, we own these clones. They're our property. We need to get them back. So I think Fennec is probably one of many, there's probably other bounty hunters out there as well. Which, funny enough, you're seeing in the Bounty Hunters comic as well, the whole hunt for Han Solo between Empire and Jedi. It's a similar scenario. I think there will be other bounty hunters, and we probably will see other familiar faces as well. So I think Fennec's just one of those. But yeah, I think she's, at the moment, my gut tells me that's who's her paymasters are. And I just love the whole conceit of, they're flying along, they're like suddenly realise we're low on fuel. We've got no food. We need some supplies because, they've spent all their days as Clone Force 99. If they need new weapons, they're in the locker. They need food. It's in the galley. You know what I mean? Everything's provided for them. In that sense, they've had it easy in that sense. They've not had an easy life, but in that sense, they've never had to worry about putting fuel in the ships. It's just they get in the ship because it's already loaded, ready to go, and off they go because they've got a ground crew taking care of all that stuff. Now
exactly
they're completely self-sufficient. So that whole sequence when I think it was Tech was like, well, yeah, I can change it. Basically, I can change the transponders so people don't know we're a wanted ship. I can do that, but we've got to land, And it was a bit like last week when the part was stolen. This week, they've got to land, and the portmaster wants his kick back, which Wrecker doesn't get, but I think Hunter gets it, So there's all these little moments where you can see them figuring it out. And that's what I'm really enjoying, because even though this felt like the most action-packed episode so far in terms of, it was like the Coruscant chase from Attack of the Clones. It had that about it. And how amazing did Pantora look? It looked absolutely phenomenal. So the animation was brilliant. The depth, the quality of the cityscape and on the ground, the characters. You just mentioned Walrus Man jiving to his music, which I thought was hilarious. Everything about it was brilliant. I just love the setup that they're learning, in a way, a new reality, just like Omega is.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, one thing that I found quite interesting. And it was something that I think we dove quite deeply into last week was everybody who was stood watching the Imperial broadcast was applauding and cheering. And I think I said last week, it'll be interesting to see the Empire from a slightly different perspective of actually not just the downtrodden, but those who are excited to see what this is going to be. And so to suddenly see all these kind of people clapping and cheering for the fact that they can exchange their local currency to Imperial credits was quite fascinating, because then suddenly, obviously, the Bad Batch are in the middle kind of going, actually, hang on a sec, what's going on here? This isn't quite right, is it? So I was quite pleasantly surprised to see that and to kind of think that I was a bit right about that. So yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I think where do you think it's going to lead? Because obviously, they do manage to shake Fennec off their tail eventually, leave the planet. She, the Portmaster at the end thinks he's done for, but she's like, I want you to keep an eye out for these guys. So now there's clearly more eyes on them. They know they're wanted. Amiga's a sharp kid. She now knows that she's not just going to be running around the galaxy with the clone brothers now. There's more going on. Where do you think it's going to lead to, maybe, over the next couple of episodes?
Well, that's a good question, really. And I think it's quite hard to, really nail down, is she a baddie or is she a goodie? She's, like we discussed, and we kind of went into detail with the Mandalorian Season 2 roundtable stuff that we discussed. There's a moral code there. So quite rightly, she didn't pop off the Spaceport Master, but also then, he's still a useful resource because he's still going to report back to her. So why would she actually just, she's not Darth Vader. She doesn't, not tolerate any kind of like failure and stuff like that. So therefore, she's going to let people kind of slide if they're still useful. And I think, it'll be interesting because she could be pursuing them, but actually, I think maybe near the end, we'll find out actually she's kind of there to help rather than necessarily hinder. But I think it's going to take a few episodes for that to pay off. I mean, obviously, I think some people were hoping or expecting that we would kind of find out who has employed her by the end of the episode, but I think this is something that can kind of run a bit and we can have a bit of intrigue about this. Because I'm with you, to be perfectly honest, I think it probably is a Camino, but at the same time, if I was to do something really kind of left field and wild speculation, I think it might be quite interesting and might even tie into the Mandalorian if maybe it was a younger Gideon, really, Moff Gideon, who in his admiral role or whatever that, it would be quite interesting to see if actually they do try and link this series up into something a lot further down the line, because again, we know that Gideon in Mandalorian is interested in Grogu for his blood, because we're assuming they're going to want to clone him to help Palpatine and his kind of efforts to get a body. So maybe again, this kind of all kind of like links back to that, and maybe actually this is very early proto backup plans by Palpatine being set into motion, so that actually should something happen now that he's Emperor of the Universe and the galaxy, that he's got a backup plan should something happen to him. So that's a bit wild, and maybe it's probably a little bit too deep for this series. But at the same time, I think we've said this before, this series does have the potential to do a nice deep dive into this kind of areas of Star Wars, that it's going to be able to link prequels to the OT to maybe even the sequel.
Yeah, that's a great point, because we've said this on the show before, not that long ago, how there's so much more of a link now between the animated Star Wars and the live-action Star Wars. There always was, but it's tangible now. And this, like you say, Gideon, I mean, the actor that plays Gideon, Giancarlo Esposito, is probably 10 years older than Ming-Na Wen, for example. She's a couple of years older than me. So Gideon, at this point, would be in his 30s, an up-and-coming officer. He'd be working his way up the ranks. He might not be an admiral yet, but he's probably well on his way, sort of character. He's got that about him. So to see him doesn't feel like a stretch. It's a good call, actually. It makes sense that you would see him. And other characters, and of course, Filoni is involved. He's probably not involved on a day-to-day basis. But now with this, like I say, Variety were quite correct. He had the promotion quite a few months ago. And it probably doesn't really change his day-to-day business that much. Status within companies is quite an important aspect to some people. They like the name tag to go with their sort of perceived role. Some people ain't fussed, like me. I couldn't give a monkeys, but some people it bothers them and it drives them because that's the kind of workplace that they inhabit, and maybe that's the case here. I don't know. Mandalorian, the understanding is that Filoni and Favloni, as we will call them, are very precious in the best sense of anything Mando related. So anything that's to do with the Mandalorian, it kind of has to cross their desk, and they have to give it a bit of a thumbs up for it to go anywhere, to any great depth. Fennec Shand is a Mandalorian character. So Filoni and Favreau, I would imagine, I don't know, but you kind of think, well, he's going to have some sort of angle on it to go, yeah, let's give this character the background that ties in with the Bad Batch. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw the Bad Batch in live action at some point, somewhere down the line.
Yeah, that would be fantastic. A good place for that would possibly be maybe the Ahsoka series. If we get a live action Rex, then why not have a live action Hunter or whoever, all of them really? That'd be kind of cool. The thing is, going back to the Filoni kind of position thing, I know, speaking personally from somebody who works in a big company, my big company quite likes people to basically be doing the role before they get the title, so to speak.
Yeah.
So it could be something that maybe from just that natural evolution of Dave working on The Mandalorian and then breaking the story for the Bad Batch and everything else that he's involved in. He's been working at the capacity at that title, and then now it's like, well, this makes sense. Let's give him the title because he's doing the job. Because I don't imagine Dave is probably too fussed about the title or the name plaque, as it were. Maybe.
Oh yeah, I think he's a bit like you get we're both wrestling fans. You get some wrestlers who don't need the belt. It's like. Ric Flair didn't need the belt after a while. He had it 16 times, but he didn't need it. John Cena don't need the belt. He's John Cena. And in the realms of Star Wars and what we are into, Dave Filoni don't need anything. He's Dave Filoni, that's enough. But yeah, I just think it feels, I think you're thinking the same. I think it just feels like now all these little things are starting to lattice together more noticeably than perhaps before. It sometimes felt like it was, a phrase you used earlier on in the episode, more reactive than proactive. Now it feels proactive. Feels like they're purposefully sort of lacing and stitching these little things together. Maybe whereas before it was like, that might work. Oh, this could work. Now it feels like, all right, we're going to do this. Now we're going to do that. And so I think it's just leading into a really good era for Star Wars storytelling.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. This almost feels like we're now entering phase 2 to kind of, if we're going to start, continue with the Marvel kind of comparisons, it kind of feels like some of the foundations are starting to, like you said, be laid with Mandalorian, and now we can build on that and extrapolate from that. And it fills me with good confidence that actually Jon Favreau potentially and also Dave Filoni are going to have an overarching kind of view of their characters, because ultimately I think we want this homogenized Star Wars universe, and we want it to feel like it's all connected, and we don't necessarily have to retcon everything and then try and kind of like justify it later.
For everything in one location, daily news, reviews, interviews, podcasts, video and social media feeds, bookmark fanthatracks.com for Star Wars news 24/7, 365.
We got another listener's question.
That brings warm feelings to my heart. Yeah, that's exciting.
It is to both of us, so I shall start the question. It is from Andy Fernside, occasional contributor to Fantha Tracks. Good question, this. Hi, Marks. With all the new Star Wars TV content announced, I'd like to know, what TV series would you like to see added to Disney Plus if you had the choice of anything? So, in the realms of Star Wars, you've got a blank sheet of paper. We've just talked, episode 4 of The Bad Batch to pieces and gone off on tangents, as we always do, about, the creativity and what's coming and such. So, if you had the choice now, if Bob Iger said, hey, Mark, I want you to write down your ideas for a TV show, and I'm going to get John and Dave to go and make it for you.
Yeah.
What would you like to see made right now? Off the top of your head, first thoughts. No pressure.
No pressure, thanks. Yeah, and thanks for that, Andy. Actually, that's a really good question, which is just me just kind of like vamping whilst I can kind of get my thoughts in order.
Vamping.
Okay, so probably I would have said initially Rogue Squadron, which we're basically hopefully going to get in a film anyway. I would very much like, obviously, more of a bounty hunter war type series, which we might get with Book of Boba Fett. So again, might be getting that already. I would, however, really like a early Jedi versus Sith, ultra old Republic, Sith War era kind of story. I think, way before what we call the High Republic. Definitely that. And I would also love very much, just to help build a foundation for the sequel trilogy, like the adventures of Luke Skywalker and Ben Solo.
Oh, I like that thought. It is, I mean, you know, you look at the sequel trilogy and you think how sadly ill-served it has been in terms of spin-off stuff. And I think my gut tells me that Disney have gone, right, those films made, you know, $1 billion each. One of them made $2 billion. You know, we've done very well. We've got Galaxy's Edge. Let's concentrate on other stuff. We'll come back to it because Star Wars has got a habit of... I mean, Disney always used to be very patient, didn't they? They'd put a film out, you know, and then they'd put it back in the Disney vault for 7 years. You wouldn't see Bambi again until the 1990s or whatever it was, you know. So Disney have got that patience, that long view, and I think they're taking the long view with the sequel trilogy. So I think they're going to leave it alone a bit until John and Daisy and Oscar are in their mid to late 30s and mid to late 40s or whatever, and then they can come back to it and do something new with it. That's just my hypothesis. In terms of a show, I love the thought of an ultra old Jedi versus Sith type story, because one thing about the High Republic, I'm enjoying the High Republic when I'm reading of it and working my way through it very slowly, sadly, because time is crunched as always, but I'm enjoying what I'm reading. I'm just so surprised it's just so recent. We're only going back 3 or 4 generations, really, to the High Republic, when I thought the High Republic would be way out. You know, Yoda is 100 to maybe 200 years old. Yoda's still sort of 700 at this point. You know, it's not that long ago, really. So that's one slight disappointment with the High Republic. I really thought they'd go way further back. One thing the Bad Batch is showing me is that Star Wars is really interested in not just telling you action adventure stories. They want to tell you about how the Emperor built his power base and how things happen. There's a lot more happening in the background. It's happening again in this episode. You know, the chain codes get mentioned again, and the Imperial credits being swapped over gets mentioned again. All these little things get sort of shouted out by Admiral Rampart on his hologram and that on Pantora. Is I'd like to see somehow very much almost like a West Wing Star Wars, just literally the office next door to the Senate, all the politics and intrigue. I think there's some real great potential for stories.
There's lots of scope for that, definitely, because you think you've got on one side, you've got the Imperial machinations, so you've got the backstabbing kind of stuff, which you got with the West Wing and House of Cards and all that stuff, and, you know, the power broken. But then also you've got that interesting other side, which is the proto-separatist Rebel Alliance movement happening. So again, you've got 2 very clear stories without necessarily having to kind of like trip over, you know, the toes of like Vader and stuff like that. I mean, you could set it at a kind of like a level whereby it's an Imperial adjunct who kind of like works his way up or something like that, and how things develop. That would be really interesting. I mean, going back to the old Republic thing, I've always kind of been fascinated to kind of early lightsabers, or even like the first time somebody goes, oh, this is a kyber crystal, I'm going to stick this in a lightsaber. Yeah. And actually see some of this stuff. The Sith have always been working in the shadows and that since, you know, all through the canon and stuff like that, really, except for when they did talk about it in the Old Republic, and they had strength and they had power and they had vessels and armies and stuff like that. And so I think it would be really cool to kind of have like a proper epic galactic war. Yeah. Rather than it always being a one side's the underdog, but actually just 2 big powerhouses just going at it, and not necessarily seeing it from the theatre of war perspective, but again, maybe seeing it from the ground level, or seeing, you know, the effects on everyday people on a planet, you know, that just suddenly gets completely wiped out and obliterated because kind of almost these gods of having this battle above, and, you know, you have no say or no control over it.
I love that because, yeah, you're right. The Clone Wars was Palpatine puppeteering both sides. If you did that sort of political story coming out, you've got the thought, well, I mean, it depends on where you want to set it. Do you want to set it in the Clone Wars because there's loads going on there? Do you want to do Palpatine's rise to power? Do you want to do it after, post? Because, as you say, the Empire's setting up their power base, the Emperor's in position. You've still got now, and I think you'll probably see this in the Bad Batch, but probably more outside of that separatist thought process becomes sort of folded into the Rebel Alliance thought process. You know, so that the Republic versus the Separatists ends up being, well, obviously the Republic becomes the Empire, but the ideals of the Republic are taken on by the Rebel Alliance. They take those up because they've been corrupted by the Empire. But that separatist thought process of we want out of this kind of gets folded in. So it's a real mishmash. So there's definitely stuff to do there. But I think back to, if you look at the old history of Star Wars, reasonably close together, you've got the discovery of hyperspace, the creation of the first lightsaber, the discovery of the Force, all happen fairly close together in the timeline. And I think with Star Wars, you know, you've got spaceships, you've got a lot of the conventions of Star Wars are there. Your galaxy map would look different. there's not so many settled worlds and things move and ebb and flow. The old Essential Atlas, which desperately needs updating, please, Lucasfilm, would show you the Star Wars galaxy at different points of time when different empires are in control. But like you said, to have a fully armed, full-on, kick-ass Sith army fighting a full-on... Because the biggest we ever see the Jedi, really, in live action is Attack of the Clones.
It's Geonosis, yeah.
It's Geonosis. You see them go at it there, and I think there's like 10,000 Jedi left in the galaxy at the time of Attack of the Clones. So obviously, whatever happens at the end of the High Republic signifies the start of that fall away from their peak of their powers, which is kind of how they're selling the High Republic. And I would imagine if you look back through history, it's been up and down like a yo-yo, like a roller coaster, hasn't it? But I love your thought process of you see these two Cold War powers fighting all around the galaxy, wars that are so far in the past you've probably forgotten. They always say that the Clone Wars is the biggest war the galaxy's ever seen. Go back 7, 8, 9,000 years, there was probably way bigger wars than that for what it was. The galaxy population was probably less. There's probably less settled worlds. But it's like you said, you look up in the skies and it's like, what the heck's going on up there? Because I'm just living in my field, working the land. I'm just a guy or a woman or whatever. I never voted for these guys. What the hell is going on? So there's definitely a story there. I love that idea, yeah.
Something that I've always wanted, and this is, you can clearly tell that I'm a die-in-the-wool kind of EU Legends fan, but I've always wanted, and I've always thought there's potential in creating a single mini-series for Tales of Jabba's Palace and Tales of Mos Eisley Cantina.
Agreed.
And basically kind of doing the, forgive me everybody, the Star Trek treatment of Deep Space Nine Trials and Tribulations, and digitally inserting, the scenes from Return of Jedi and A New Hope into the stories, and seeing how they could do that, because they did it really well with Deep Space Nine, and that was a really kind of like small scale. But you think now with the volume and everything else, they could absolutely knock it out of the park. And I think even if they don't necessarily take the direct stories from Tales of Mos Eisley Cantina and Jabba's Palace from back in 90, was it 96, 97, I think, something like that? Yeah, and just do new ones, but there's still scope and potential to do that, and I think that would be fascinating and just a real fun kind of thing. I mean, we like our Star Wars to have like lots of kind of like epic proportions and drama and stuff like that, like the Old Republic. But I think also sometimes it's really fun when we kind of see that kind of almost tag and bink kind of like real personal kind of capers and stuff like that, and just have fun with it. Star Wars needs to be fun, no matter what level you're making it for.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, Trials and Tribulations was Star Trek's 30th anniversary. It was 96,
yes.
So 25 years ago. And you're right, it still holds up today. The visuals in that hold up brilliantly. It's just so well done. So, and at the end of season 2 of The Mandalorian, when you see Jabba's Palace, I mean, they physically recreated the palace because they couldn't really do it in the volume, so they recreate the palace. And it looked amazing, and it felt like, did they film this when they did Jedi and they just didn't tell us? It just looked so authentic. So I totally agree. I think there's some scope there to do some really interesting stuff. What worries me, like the Taika film, I think he's going to surprise. We've talked about this on the show before. I think he's going to surprise us with something that's quite substantial. I think there'll be humour in it, but I think if you try and be too clever, if you try and do Star Wars humour with no frame of reference, it'll make no sense. If you try and do relevant today type comedy, it'll age horribly. So humour in Star Wars is a massive danger. Yeah, it's a huge danger. You can be witty, you can be dry, you can say humorous things within the context of what's happening, but if you try and be clever, it won't. I don't think it'll work. I don't think Taika's going to do that. I love Ragnarok. Ragnarok works just brilliantly because it's great action, great humour, it's dry and witty.
It's irreverent, isn't it?
It's irreverent, exactly. And I think Star Wars can be irreverent because at its core, it's a little bit goofy. It is a little bit cheesy. It has elements of Eurovision. Just going to bring that up. Neil Plan, proud of it. So, there's, so, you can throw in all these little things at Star Wars. I love that idea of Tales from Jabba's Palace, Tales from Mos Eisley Cantina. There's definitely scope in doing something like that. But I'm throwing this back to Andy. I'd like to know what you'd like to see, Andy. So send your email in. Let us know. I want to know what you'd like to see, because everyone is going to have a thought. I'd love to see more Han Solo. I'd love to see a Han Solo series that I look back now with, Monday morning quarterback eyes and go, yeah, they should have made that a series, shouldn't they? I'm not dissing the film because I adore the film, but I want to see more of Alden Ehrenreicher's Han Solo. So seriously, we could talk all night about this.
Absolutely. This is definitely a what if. And I think why leave it with just Andy? I think anyone who wants to kind of like pitch us their series, we can't promise we're going to get it made, but if it's that good, we might pass it on. So, but yeah, so seriously, in all fairness, if you would love to hear what you've got to say and your thoughts and stuff, because maybe there's, as Mark's just said, about Solo, there's something painfully obvious that we've just completely glossed over. And I'm sure there probably is, the Adventures of Walden Kitster for one, but hey, I will get that series made one day. I promise you.
I don't doubt it.
But of course, in order for you to send an email or a letter or whatever you want to send, you're going to need to know how to do it. So I think it's probably best that Mark tells you how you can get in touch.
I'd love to do that. If you want to be a part of the action and stay updated on all the latest Star Wars news, visit fanthatracks.com or check out the free Fanthatracks app through the App Store to follow us on your mobile device. Very good. You can reach out to us and send in your listeners' questions by emailing radio@fanthatracks.com. So just like Andy did, just like our recent letter writers have done, send us a question. Yeah, me and Mark like to talk, so we will talk about it and rabbit like I do quite often. Comment, like and share in any of our social media feeds @Fanthatracks, and be sure to subscribe, leave a review, preferably a 5-star one please, on Amazon Music, Audible, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcatcher or smart speaker of choice. And as always, thanks to James Semple for composing the Fanthatracks intro, Adam O'Brien for our Making Tracks opening music, and Mark Daniel and Vanessa Marshall for our voiceovers. And please check out Sundays, 9 o'clock UK time. Good Morning Tatooine. It's our weekly live Fanthatracks news show. Live Sundays, 9 o'clock UK, 4 o'clock Eastern, 1 o'clock Pacific. Facebook and YouTube, next day on the site. Great fun. This week, it's me and Brian talking about all the latest news.
That is the highlight of my Sunday evening. Can I just say that?
I was hoping you'd say week, but there you go. Sunday evening. I'll take that.
Because that's Sunday's the beginning of a week, so
technically, yeah.
Have fun on that. I will probably try and hop onto the GMT chat and chuck some abuse your way.
He would have had you on today, Mark, but I think he had the rumour that you were trying to burn Sheffield to the ground, so he thought you'd better leave you to it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, to be fair, yeah, we were lucky with that one. We didn't, but hey, that's what rock and roll's all about. And if anybody wants to know anything about that, check out my Instagram, which is mmulcaster. And of course, if you want to find out what Mark's up to, you can check him out on prefect_timing. Thank you for listening. We hope that you will join us again next week for next week's episode. But until then, stay safe, wear a mask, have a vaccine, and may the Force be with you.
Coming up next on Fanthatracks Radio, it's another episode of Making Tracks.